Hey folks, David Stewart here. Let's talk about book covers and book cover pricing. This is a response to a super chat that I got in my live stream that I recorded today, but I couldn't adequately answer the question on the live stream, and that was because my live stream stopped working. I couldn't get it to work, and Google was not receiving any of my information. My internet appeared to be functional on my end, so I had to call the live stream a little bit early, but now you just get a standalone video answering this question if you've ever had it as best as I can. I'll read the super chat and then I will just go into some basic stuff about book cover pricing. I've covered a lot of this before elsewhere, but this will be a nice little, hopefully direct video towards that. So from Darth Kilhoun, what is the cost for custom not stock book covers? Now I'm actually going to cover stock book covers and maybe question what he means by stock book covers, but book covers run a huge price range. You can get pre-made, well-designed actually book covers for like $50, and then it goes up from there. So you can buy pre-made book covers. I pulled up a website real quick that has a bunch of pre-made book covers, and they're usually in the range of like $60 to $100 for the design, depending on how complicated the design was and how much effort and labor went into designing that. And a pre-made book cover, and I'll just go ahead and let me go ahead and pull this up real quick. A pre-made book cover, this is rockingbookcovers.com. I think I've talked to the guy who does this like at one point online. So I don't know him, but it's a good site, and it'll just show you lots of book cover designs. So these are all pre-made covers, and this takes a lot of guesswork out if you're wanting to just release a book and you want to keep it simple and you want to get it done on a timeline. If you wrote a book and you want to get it out this week for some reason, a pre-made book cover is a great option. And you can see the pricing here, $75, $70, $90 for something that's a little bit more complicated because of all the photo compositing work that's being done in some of this stuff here. So this one's a little bit more expensive, so you pick the one that, this really fits my book. So you'll find that if you're working within a certain genre, there's these trends and there's certain design elements and colors, say, that fit with your genre, and so you can find a pre-made book cover that will actually match your book pretty well. So like this has some sort of obscure space trooper here with the purple and the pink. This says like science fiction, space science fiction, and so you could buy this and just the designer here would put all of your info on it, and bam, you have a book cover, and you can get that out in a hurry, which is great. So that could be what Darth means by stock, like a pre-made book cover, or he could mean a stock photo cover, which is basically that's the covers that I do for the most part are stock photo covers. So, if you look at something like this book, this is this is not a pre-made cover. This is one I designed, and this is a stock photo cover in that it's an assemblage of photographs that I photoshopped together to create a composite image, which doesn't actually exist except for the way that I created it, that communicates more or less what elements you need to know for this genre in this book. This is a fantasy book. Obviously, you can tell by the font, so the font will communicate that. These are lots of things that you learn and pick up as a graphic designer, like what fonts, kind of by just researching lots of book covers mostly, what fonts are going to communicate what genres, what colors. Usually you're not going to see a lot of gray fantasy, but I just wanted something different because it was called City of Silver. Everything matches up. You have some mysterious characters, maybe a little bit of splash of color in the middle, and then you have like a medieval looking town with like a big moon. It's very evocative of something that is going to be fantasy, and also you have a male and female, so you might have a romance there, and indeed there is like a romance running through this book series. You can actually get the second one, which also has a photo composite cover, a little bit longer, Tyrant's Gallow. These are rather complex photo composites, so these are not what I would say are $50 covers. Like I would probably, if I was going to custom design something like this for someone, I would charge upwards of $200 to do this work, because there's actually like a lot of photos that go in this, and I do have a plan with Adobe Stock, so I don't have to pay outrageous prices for the licenses to the stock photos, but that is an ongoing cost, so I can grab like 10 photos to make a really complicated fantasy landscape if I want to, like what I do with in some of my books. There's just a whole bunch of stuff that goes into making like a fantasy landscape. This is actually like 12 different pictures that I like chopped together. So on the lower end, you could get pre-mades for like 50 to what looked like on this slide, like 150. And then it's going to go up from there once you are having custom work done. Now, if you're going to leave the realm of stock photo covers, which are pretty cheap to make and have this look, this bright, high contrast look, then you're talking about something a little bit different. And that's, I'll address that in a second. But if you're going to have a custom cover made, usually it's going to be more than $200. So if you're going to have somebody design one from scratch, you're going to have to pay for that labor directly. It's probably going to be maybe a little bit more labor. They're going to have to do something a little bit more specific. Finding the right photos is going to take more time to represent what you want on the cover or your unique story. So expect to spend $200 on up. I know some designers that charge way more than that, like $1,500 for a photograph cover, but their covers are very good. And you know, if they have a great track record of designing covers for best-selling books, then that $1,500 could be worth it. Now, if you're going to go with an illustrated cover, it's going to be probably a lot more expensive than a photograph cover. And there's some very specific reasons for that. Number one is that it's actually more labor intensive. It takes a lot longer to do a painting, generally speaking, than doing like a photographed cover. Not always, but it usually takes longer, as well as it's a different and rarer skill set to do. And the thing about illustrated covers is, you know, you could get illustrated covers done on the cheaper end. There's artists that'll do it for $100 or maybe even less. I don't know. But if you're going to have a illustrated cover, I'm using that term broadly, it has to be good. Basically, a mediocre photo cover is going to be way better than a mediocre illustrated cover. It just is. If you look at them, whenever I see a mediocre illustrated cover, it sticks out like a sore thumb and looks like, you know, not completely unprofessional, but it doesn't fit in the professional space very well. So you're gonna have to get a good image if you're gonna go with that. So, you know, I do have an illustrated cover on one of my books. That's Water of Awakening. And this was not one that I had custom done. I needed to get this book out fairly quickly, like within I had planned on doing it like, you know, within a couple months. And the artist that I really wanted to use, Karen Byatt, the guy who drew this image, he was like really booked, and he's also expensive. So I licensed one image that he had just sitting around that no one was using. He'd drawn it for fun or something. So I really liked it, and it actually fit the story. So it's kind of like a pre-made cover. I licensed the image, and I did all of the typography work because that's one of my realms of expertise, I suppose. So I just licensed the image, and then I did the text work. So if you were going to go that route, you could license an image for pretty cheap, in some cases, you know, like $50. And then if you have experience as a graphic designer, you can do the text, or you can give it to a book cover designer who will be able to add that text probably for a really cheap price, because it's not that much work to do really good text once you know what you're doing. So that's one option that you could go on the cheaper end, which is going to be licensing something that already exists. If you are going to, but like I said, you're probably going to pay a couple $100 to license a good painting. You know, if you wanted to license a Michael Whalen painting that he did at some point, which there's metal bands that do that. They have like Michael Whalen paintings of you know, all various fantasy images that he's done over the years, whether it's Elric or someone else, and it costs quite a bit of money to license those. But it's a good painting. If you wanted to have someone like Michael Whalen make a new painting for your book, you're talking thousands and thousands of dollars for him to do that custom artwork. And high quality artists are going to charge a lot, upwards of $1,000 to do a painting. So if you want a high quality, keyword high quality painting, and I don't recommend you do anything less than a high quality painting if you're going to do a painted cover, then expect to spend upwards of $1,000 to get a high quality product. Or spend less than that, a couple of $100, and license one that already exists, and then you can add your own typography to it. I have lots of tutorials on doing the typography and figuring out how to do the layout in both free software and paid software like Photoshop. So this is the last thing I'll say about this. When you're considering cost, here's the main thing that you need to think of. Actually, before I get to that, illustrated covers, most genres, you don't actually want to use them. Okay, most genres, you actually want to use a photo cover. There's exceptions. Fantasy is one, so various fantasy genres, you're going to want to use an illustrated cover if it's available, or you can use a photo cover. But you wouldn't use an illustrated cover for most kinds of, say, literary fiction, or certainly not romance. In fact, romance, you could get really cheap covers made. Just have like a dude with abs and like a hot girl and some kind of background with like a castle maybe, and boom, you've got your medieval romance cover. They're pretty easy to make, and I can actually do a tutorial on making romance covers. Not that hard. So if you're doing romance, you're definitely going to want a photo cover because it's going to have that sharp detail. And like I said, a mediocre photo cover is way better than a mediocre illustrated or painted cover. If it's painted, it's got to be high quality. And that has to do with the photos. Photos look sharp. They look really sharp. And a good designer can make them look even better and make the whole image get tied together. But a poorly or mediocre painting doesn't look sharp. It just doesn't look good. It doesn't look accurate. It doesn't look right. It's going to look off for the most part. So that's my big advice. Now, before I leave you, let me say that deciding how much you want to spend on a cover, whether it's going to be $50 or $0 potentially, like if you design your own covers, and if it's if it's like a one-off thing, like if it's a free book that you're giving away, to your list or something, you don't have to spend a ton of money on cover. You could make a cover yourself pretty easily. Just find one image on a stock photo website that's already done. It costs you $10 and to license it, and then you can put your typography on it, put your words, and ship it. So it could potentially cost you $0 though if you use public domain images like old paintings or something, like Penguin Classics kind of paintings. So it could potentially cost you $0 to do something if you're willing to do it yourself. That's great, because that means any time that you sell a book, it's profit. You're not having to make back the cost of your cover. A $1,500 cover might really be worth it for somebody who is expecting to sell a lot of books and is going to be highly competitive in a very big genre like, say, fantasy or young adult fantasy or something like that. It's a really competitive category. So you got to have a really great book cover, and you don't need to drop $1,500 on a book cover unless you've already established your career and set yourself up to have success at a high level when you get to actually publishing that book. For most people, you want to think about how long do you want to take to earn back the cost of your cover, or all of your costs, because there might be other costs like editing and stuff like that. So I say for people that are trying to publish their first book, try not to spend more than like $200 or $250 for a cover total, because you can make $250 back within a year and not have any clue how to do this business at all, and you're going to be fine. The problem is that people think that I just put a book on Amazon and somehow I'll make money, and there's a lot more that goes into this business than that. So I recommend you get a really cheap cover for your first one, as cheap as you're willing to pay. And the thing is, if you buy a $50 cover and maybe it's not really what you want, you can always replace it later because you are publishing this yourself. So if you decide you want to invest in a higher quality cover later on, you could buy a $50 cover now. You could buy or $70 cover now, and then you could buy a $700 cover later on when you really want to push that book. And yeah, you're losing a little bit of money, but if that book doesn't take off, or you decide that you could do much better on your next book and that's really your first book, well, then you didn't break your bank and get completely bummed out about how you didn't make your money back from buying some kind of crazy expensive cover to do whatever you're trying to do. So new artists, I recommend you make a budget, $200 to $250 or less for your first book. And once you get your feet wet and you figure out more about the business, then you can think about a higher budget if you want, or you could figure out how to make better use of that same budget, $200 to $250, to get a high quality high quality cover done for your book. And you actually can get some very high quality covers done for $200 and $250. You don't have to spend thousands upon thousands of dollars, but be aware if you're having original artwork done that's painted, whether it's a digital painting or it's like on a canvas, expect to spend more than $1,000 for the high quality stuff. And I don't recommend you get low quality illustrations. One last piece of advice. I see sometimes people putting out books with comic book looking covers. Don't do covers that look like they're from a comic book for a novel. Unless you're doing like a Japanese light novel, in which case you're going to have a manga look, of course. So if you're doing like an isekai light novel, yeah, you can use, you're going to hire a manga cover artist to do that. Otherwise, if you're in fantasy, don't do a comic book cover. And that's going to be, comic book covers look a certain way. And what they are is they have these strong defined ink lines and then fields of color. Nowadays, it's all gradient color that's done in Photoshop, and it looks a certain way. It looks like a comic cover. And you can spot it a mile away, and it signals the wrong thing to the audience. So don't get a comic book cover if you can help it. In general, that's my general piece of advice. It doesn't really fit in with the genres and can send the wrong signals. People might think it's a comic book. So you want your book cover to look like a book cover, not a comic book cover. But I've seen a bunch of writers lately putting out these illustrated covers that are inked and stuff like a comic book, and it just looks like a comic book cover. And if you're selling a comic book, you want a comic book cover. If you're selling a book, you want a book cover. That's my last piece of advice. So thanks so much, guys, and I'll see you next time. Let me know what you want to see and what you want to hear in the future. And I'll have another video with another Super Chat answer, and I guess probably today. So thanks so much, and have a great one.